This interview is sponsored by Grantstone Shoes. Grantstone Shoes is a third-generation family of shoemakers that uses high-quality leather to make very high-quality men's dress shoes and boots at affordable prices. Mo and I each have a pair of these shoes. We think they're good. We've been wearing them for over a month now, trying them out. If you don't believe us, go check out the customer reviews for Grantstone Shoes. They have a lot of 5-star customer reviews. They also have excellent reviews from independent fashion bloggers. And if you like the shoes, enter promo code GOLD, that's GOLD, on the grantstoneshoes.com website for 10% off your order. That's grantstoneshoes.com, enter promo code GOLD for a 10% off discount. Hi, everyone. It's Jason Bierk of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. He was a top value investor on Wall Street for a long time. He's also respected as one of the top forensic accountants on Wall Street. Before the 2008 financial crash, he was warning people about General Electric, General Motors, and the banks, talking about how they were using bad accounting, and there was potential bankruptcy there and a lot of other problems. He proved to be correct. And he's been warning us for a number of years now about the Clinton Foundation. He's been on before talking about the Clinton Foundation, and we're going to talk more about the Clinton Foundation again. Charles Ortel, thank you for coming back.
It's an honor to be on your show, Jason.
Now, Charles, this is a very fluid situation. We tried to do a couple recordings before November 15th, and here we are. And then today, we get Kellyanne Conway, who's Donald Trump's former campaign manager, and she's on TV talking about how Donald Trump may not want to pursue the investigation into Clinton emails and the Clinton Foundation. What's your opinion of this?
Okay, so I think the area of charities and the way they're regulated is of crucial importance to everyone across the political spectrum in the United States of America and in many countries around the world where charities are so active. In the last 20, 25 years, or so, as the world has become more interconnected and there's been a lot more flows, particularly from the U.S. outside in charity works, there hasn't been the required upgrade in the regulatory apparatus to allow the principal regulators of these charities, which are generally speaking the Attorney General in an individual state, to have the staffs and the training and the controls that they need to ensure that charities like the Clinton Foundation actually play by the rules. And the rules are super, super strict. So the first question when you think about the Clinton Foundation is, who regulates it? You know, narrowly, you could say that it's the Attorney General of the state of Arkansas as one regulator, but since they now have been soliciting in virtually every U.S. state and Washington, D.C., then most of those governments have a dog in the hunt, the regulatory hunt. But also because the Clinton Foundation's been all over the world, either raising or operating or both, a lot of foreign governments have the right to decide what should go on here. And the federal government, in the form of the IRS and the Department of Justice, are only two strands of it. I guess there's also the Federal Trade Commission that has the right to look at this. So what I think we have to be very careful here, remembering, is that we're sitting here, it's November 22nd. Donald Trump is still a private citizen. He's the president-elect. He has to put together a cabinet. That cabinet has to be vetted if it needs security clearances. It has to then be vetted by, I believe the Senate has to confirm quite a few of his picks. The last thing he should be doing, whether he wanted to do it now or not, would be to announce to the world that, because he's so upset with the person he just bested in a tough, bitter, long, hard-fought contest, that he's decided now what he's going to do is launch a vendetta against his opponent. So of course he's not going to say that, and of course he's not, I don't think he will ever do that actually, but of course he's also not going to give his opponents in the Democratic Party, the diehard opponents who may never be able to say they like any aspect of anything that he does, even if it helps them. He's not going to give those people a chance to stir up, as they are now trying to do with these riots around the nation, to stir up opposition to him before he's even arrived. So I think that's a general comment. Now, a specific comment, you have to look carefully at what he said. Kellyanne's comments were made, I believe, on Morning Joe early this morning, and they were subsequently clarified twice. They were clarified later on in the formal meetings and written about in a New York Times article where the headline reads, Trump says that he will not open a new investigation. Now remember, we don't really know the full extent of what investigations may be operating inside the U.S. and various states, inside the IRS, inside the FBI, and around the world. We simply don't know how many investigations there are, and that's as it should be. You know, the way this works, at least in our country, is you're innocent until proven guilty. And so it is very bad form, I would argue, for the government to be saying, you know, you're under suspicion for X, Y, and Z without giving you a chance to have counsel, defend yourself, to go through the normal process. So we really don't know the state of these various investigations. We do know from Comey's recent final letter that was misreported as well. What that letter said, and I read it carefully, is that the FBI had reviewed all emails to and from Hillary Clinton during the period of her tenure as Secretary of State. And it decided reviewing those alone, and mind you, those do not include other people working for her and around her and in state. They do not include the period before she became Secretary of State. They don't include the period after she left Secretary of State, based merely on the review of email during the period when she was serving as Secretary of State. Comey says in that letter that nothing has changed his opinion from his first letter. But as I say, there's lots of stuff that's not in there. So I think, you know, we ought to all take a deep breath, and we all ought to think carefully about the following, and that is that because you're a member of a given political party, that does not give you as a legal defense the right to say, you know, when there's a presidential election and now Trump's in charge, Republicans are in charge, you have no real legal basis to say that, you know, now my defense is that any inquiry into this past period is partisan and is obviously biased, and therefore, I'm innocent. That's ridiculous. I mean, that would basically say that, you know, we've moved to a place I don't think anyone wants to move to, which is that whenever a given political party wins, that party has the right to decide what's criminal, what isn't criminal. And that would be an intolerable state of affairs. That indeed is a banana republic way of looking at life, and that is precisely not the way this country is supposed to work, as people who are familiar with our history understand, and certainly as the lawyers around Trump and the lawyers who are Bill and Hillary Clinton ought to know.
Now, Charles, I've heard rumors that the Clintons are trying to get pardons from Barack Obama, and also Chelsea Clinton, who's very good friends with Ivanka Trump, has been using that connection there to leverage that to try to get some type of blanket pardon from Donald Trump once he's in office. Do you think the Clintons are going to be all this while, you know, the Clintons say they haven't done anything wrong? So do you think the Clintons are going to are going to be successful in getting pardons?
Absolutely not, and let me explain why. So the way I understand this to work is, well, let's back up a little bit. We are talking here about the things that I'm interested in are possible charity operation fraud and charity solicitation fraud. This is a specialized area of the law, okay? And there are special rules that apply to charity that don't seem to apply in politics. And they don't actually even apply in for-profit making activities. So there's a special set of rules here. People need to understand these rules. They also need to understand that a president under our system may give blanket pardons of certain federal crimes only. A president has no power, certainly no power, to pardon foreign crimes, right? I mean, think about that for a second, right? Our president certainly cannot pardon crimes that may have been committed in the United Kingdom, as an example. That would be a ridiculous state of affairs. Under our system, the president also cannot pardon state crimes. Unfortunately for the Clintons, they, I believe, and the Clinton Foundation, and the executives and the trustees of the Clinton Foundation, current and former, and many of their agents, have been involved in a wide pattern of escalating criminal activity involving states and numerous foreign countries. So we start with the substance. The president neither Donald Trump, the president-elect, or Barack Obama, the sitting president, neither of them can actually craft a true pardon that will leave the Clinton Foundation standing. And why is that? Because if you accept a pardon, you're admitting guilt. And you would then have to explain in your filings, your various filings, why you got into this position. And that would cripple your ability to fundraise further.
Yeah.
So as a practical matter, just pardoning Hillary Clinton alone is not a way out of trouble for her. And then you get into the question of, well, if you really were going to try to do it, what would you have to do? You'd have to convince every foreign party, every U.S. state, to pardon not only Hillary, but Bill and Chelsea, probably Chelsea's husband, and all the trustees, and the significant donors, and the executives, and perhaps the accounting firms and the law firms involved here. And if you were to go down that track, and if you'd had all the money raised that you needed for the Barack Obama Foundation, which wants to operate come January 21st, 2017, if you had all the money raised to get that foundation going, maybe you could go down this path. But unfortunately for Barack Obama and his team, on November 15th, by November 15th, 2016, they released their filings, which show, I think, in rough terms, that the only amount of money they've been able to raise so far and have in the bank is $5 million. And they have to raise, it's estimated, there have been various estimates saying that they're looking to raise about $500 million for the campus in Chicago. Under the laws that pertain to presidential archives, they have to raise another $300 million in the form of an endowment. That means they have to raise $795 million more dollars than they have in the bank. And the last time this happened, when Bill Clinton pardoned Mark Rich and his business partner, I think Pincus Green, there were so many investigations that Bill Clinton wasn't able, and his team were not able to be effective fundraising in 2001, which is why, and they illegally changed, in my view, their mission to make it more sexy than just building a building in Little Rock, to fighting AIDS and doing all this stuff, which they never changed their mission properly. But in the end, it seems it was more effective for them in garnering money. I don't think Barack Obama and his team, and Barack just recently, our president just recently having said, I believe in Lima, that he's proud of the fact, and we can debate whether this is really true, that his administration, his 8 years, has been, quote, scandal-free. I don't think he wants to begin his post-presidency as a private citizen in the crosshairs of the FBI and all these other people for doing exactly what Bill Clinton ended up doing to mar his post-presidency. I really don't think he wants to do that. So, and then we get to the third level of concern. I mean, one of the things that the people in theory rioting around the country are rioting about is the perception that there really is there's two systems of law. There's a system of law for the powerful, who can either break the law with impunity, or get treated leniently when they get caught, and there's a system of law for everybody else. And, you can look into the history of this around the country. Individual states take charity frauds that are relatively small very seriously. There's this congressperson, I don't know what the adjudication of her matter has been yet, but she was tagged earlier this election, indicted in a Florida federal court, I believe, and charged with crimes over an $800,000 potential slush fund, much smaller, far smaller than the Clinton network of what I think are charity frauds. And you look up the prison sentences that she would face if she were convicted by the I think it's federal prosecutor. You're looking at 350 years in prison for $800,000 and over a relatively short period of time. And you contrast that with this, which would appear, if you accept their numbers, to be more than $2 billion over close to 20 years in every U.S. state, in Washington, D.C., and in almost 100 countries around the world. The defendant in the Florida matter is an African American woman, sitting congressperson.
Yeah, Corinne Brown.
Corinne Brown, and she's a Democrat. She was a superdelegate for Hillary. Why is it fair to go after her and let the Clintons skate? And I think we ought to be asking some larger questions here. How was it that the Clinton Foundation managed to get off on the wrong foot? When you really deeply dive into the history, as I've been doing over the last many months, this thing was, I believe, a fraud from the very beginning. It was born in fraud. It was born as the Clintons were being investigated for shady fundraising practices in the '96 election and trying to cover up the Lewinsky mess. It's really been a troubled matter ever since the very beginning. And there's some real searching questions that ought to be asked here. And how, under a George W. Bush administration for 8 years, why did this thing escalate? Why did the IRS never do anything about it? What's really going on here? Were the Clintons successful in inserting, cronies into these various bureaucracies who are now maybe still there and are doing their bidding? I mean, is that the way this government's been working for this long? Because that's really not right. The Constitution, actually, when you check into it, doesn't really touch on the question of these corrosive parties.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, it's, I think, potentially a breath of great fresh air to have, the Trumpistas, or whatever you want to call them, looking at this the way that I think and hope they're going to look at it, without really regard so much to political party, but it's to, what is the right thing to do? What are the realistic, sensible approaches to take here to get this country back on a stronger footing and a faster, a more robust growth trajectory, using real numbers, not funny accounting and fake news out of the government about the great successes we're having. How do we get people in the private sector off of subsidies from the government, making and selling and devising new products and services that we, a nation of 320 million, can sell to this, in total, I think there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. We should be able to win. And we ought to turn, instead of, wasting as much time as we're wasting, deciding how to carve up, who wins and who loses inside our country. We should unite as a nation, realize that there's a big world out there. There are a lot of consumers. There are a lot of potential customers for much of what we can do. This country is, on many bases, far better positioned than almost every other country in the world. And let's start thinking of ourselves as winners, not as people who are trying to scam other people to beggar our neighbor. Let's stifle this jealousy stuff, and let's really understand who are the people who need help. How can we help them effectively? How do I get them help? And how do we win again?
Charles, I would say a lot of those protesters that you're talking about, a lot of them are paid protesters by George Soros and the different organizations he's funding. So he's trying to divide people by race, gender, class. He's a chaos master. I think he's a total scumbag. I think he's pretty evil. He's an evil billionaire. I don't think he has any loyalties to the U.S. whatsoever. The Clinton Foundation, though, is just losing tons of money in donations right now that Hillary lost the election. Do you think if Hillary had won the election, do you think that she would have ordered, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the New York Police Department, who I know are all investigating things still? The IRS is even investigating the Clinton Foundation, at least the Dallas IRS is. Do you think if she had won the election and been president, this would have been a moot point?
Well, I would hope not. I mean, as I understand the way this works, before I got involved even looking at this, I checked with experts. This is not the first time we've had a contested presidential election. This is not the first time we've had a surprise win. And for many, many decades, the people who think carefully and who are lawyers and who administer the wheels of justice have thought through the issues of, how do we make sure that just because somebody wins, let's say a gubernatorial election or a presidential election, how do we make sure that there isn't this kind of, vendetta justice? And as a result of that, there are, steps that you have to go through, in order to get an investigation launched. I'm told there's a certain standard, and then to get it to the next level, another standard, another standard, another standard. So I would have hoped, frankly, that, the FBI would have been given, in this matter, the kind of free rein that it deserves to have. Because, the issues here, one of the reasons I got involved with this, I like tackling big issues, because I can choose what I want to do, and why not pick issues that are of big importance, like the ones you mentioned. I started on with GE and the big multinationals. So the question of whether the private charities in the United States are run effectively, are run to serve a public interest, are truly helping, is a big question. And going way back into history, I think it was Montesquieu, the 18th century, visited America and was so impressed, with the degree to which Americans back then had this civic spirit. And I think that's true today. Whether you have a ton of money in the bank or nothing in your back pocket, when things happen, when disaster strikes, Americans are very generous, and we are very charitable, actually. And I think people don't generally say, when you're trying to help the disadvantaged, they don't generally ask, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican or are you whatever. It's just, how can we help?
Yeah. A lot of Americans donated money to Haiti, right? But yet the Clinton Foundation stole almost all the money out. Did the Haitian people didn't even get 6% of it?
Well, and that's so awful. When I was raised here in Manhattan, and when I worked in banking, one of the things that happens is, next thing you know, you're invited to benefit after benefit after benefit. And, I started thinking about these, and I got to a point where I would say to people, listen, if I don't have to go to the benefit, I will give you more money. Because, you go to these fancy restaurants and hotels or whatever, and there's everyone's swooning around in black tie and fancy dresses and getting there in fancy cars and eating fancy meals, and you're trying to raise money for desperately poor people or whatever the cause is. Who needs to go to another party? We really don't need to do that. Let's try to actually fix some of these problems. And the laws are written, actually, when you read them, they're sensible. One of the things, they have there's been a major congressional inquiry into this, into how this ought to be rejiggered. I think it was 1969 for private foundations. We really need to think through here, what is the best way to let these charities get their books done, make fair reports to potential donors, and what's the best way to have these charities win for the people they're trying to help, as opposed to setting up an unregulated cover where fraudsters, it seems, use the cover of a charity to go around the world, collect money that may or may not actually be deposited into the books of the charity, and then can sit offshore and be used either for investments or nefarious purposes, or be used as a means to have foreign interests participate in U.S. politics. This is an area that really needs to be carefully thought through. And so one of the things that I did, and I'll just have to give these people some credit, of the many people in Congress who could have done something about it. You would have thought the Congress people representing New York might do something about it, or Arkansas might do something about it. No. It took Marsha Blackburn, a congressperson in Tennessee, who sits on a committee, I think, that has authority over the budget of the Federal Trade Commission, which is supposed to regulate these charities. It was Marsha Blackburn who, last year, independent of me, began pushing as hard as she could. And then I noticed earlier this year that she was really doing great stuff. So I reached out to her, and lo and behold, I got a phone call from their staff. And I went down to Washington in late May, and ever since then, I've been in close contact with a wonderful staff there, who they don't have to represent me. I'm here in Manhattan. They cover the district that's Nashville and part of around Tennessee. These people are wonderful people, and I'm hoping that people on the other side of the aisle are now going to take a look at this and say, it really is pretty awful to go as a former president, an aspiring president, a former attorney general, a former governor, highly educated people who should know better. It's pretty awful to lend your name, your wife's name, your daughter's name to an undisciplined, ungoverned, uncontrolled, unaudited mess that has gone on since October 23, 1997. That is just, it's impossible to explain this. And so we need an explanation. And I think we can learn from this. This can be actually, I think it was Francis Bacon, and perhaps before him, other people said it, that in order to find light, you must have darkness. And this is a dark long period in charity world that a presidential archive that was supposed to be nothing more than that, based in Little Rock, Arkansas, was used in this fashion by so many people, to such criminal extent for so long. We really need to understand what actually happened. What were the, how were the controls that were supposed to be in place? How were those bypassed? And in doing this kind of work, we can then set about and come up with a better system going forward to regulate these types of charities. Now, there's a guy, obviously very well known, Warren Buffett, who I frequently have disagreed with, in different actions that he's taken with his company since 1998. But earlier, maybe a number of years ago, he made the observation, with which I wholeheartedly agree, and that is it's actually quite tough to give money away effectively. Because, in 2016, there's a lot of government money flowing at problems. We spend, I think, $6 trillion all in all government, state, local, federal, per year, $6 trillion on government. And then you have the amount of money that charities spend, which can be, depending on how you look at it, a trillion or so, maybe more than that. That's a lot of money sloshing around. And, to come up with a new idea that doesn't already have attention and do it effectively, it's not so easy. And then, there's many people, and right now, as we're on this podcast, as people are listening, there are people around the world, and probably almost every country in the world, who are affiliated one way or another with a U.S. charity. And more often than not, those people, our people, whether Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter, our fellow Americans around the world, need to be able to walk proudly in these countries. And these foreign countries need to understand that our charities are serious operations, and the trustees who run them, when the charities run amok, are people who should and will and have in the past been severely punished. So they take these obligations seriously. It's good. It'll be good to put this foundation, and there are quite a few others that we could get into. There's another one called Grameen Bank, which is, I think, a complete fraud. That's a micro-lending concept that deserves tremendous attention. There are quite a few of them affiliated with the Clinton Foundation. There are quite a few charities that are actually political action committees or political action entities that have the benefit of getting tax-exempt contributions, whether they're on the right or the left. That has to stop. We need a level playing field here. We need, in this area, I'm told actually this week by some experts that the problem the IRS has looking at charities is there are so many other vexing problems that the IRS really doesn't have the manpower, which you hear all the time from various government agencies, but they don't have the manpower to get behind and understand something this complex.
Well, they supposedly have whistleblower laws now, like how Harry Markopoulos was supposed to turn in the Madoff Ponzi scheme. But then, the people at the SEC, when he hand wrapped them mountains of evidence, they didn't listen. There was political fighting between the New York City office of the SEC and the Boston office, where Harry Markopoulos gave the evidence initially. So that political infighting among intra-agency for government bureaucrats. So I think that happens a lot too. They just have to have better whistleblower laws, Charles. If people don't understand something, bring the whistleblower in who will turn it in. I know Eric Braverman is out there. He's a former Clinton Foundation CEO, and they could give him a deal. I heard he was on the run trying to hide. So if the IRS wants the information about, the fraud at the charity, why not give the guy immunity, give him a cut of the money that's going to be recovered in the clawback in exchange for his testimony? Things that make sense to me are not being done. It's just really sad. Now, I want to talk to you about the WikiLeaks. We've seen come out from the WikiLeaks revelations a lot of stuff about the Clinton Foundation. We've seen that Chelsea Clinton's wedding, the Clintons are worth so much money, and yet $3 million was taken from the Clinton Foundation to pay for her wedding. We've seen, people inside the WikiLeaks emails, whether it's campaign manager John Podesta or other people, admitting within the State Department and the Clinton campaign that crimes were committed at the Clinton Foundation. You need to stop doing this. Hillary Clinton won't stop. She knows she's committing crimes. She knows she has over 500 conflicts of interest. There's pay to play. We've heard Julian Assange admit that one of the greatest revelations from the WikiLeaks Podesta emails was the fact that Hillary knew that that Qatar and Saudi Arabia, who treat women very, very poorly, extremely poorly, were actually, giving lots and also funding terrorism. Were ISIS and Al Qaeda were actually giving also money to the Clinton Foundation, and she didn't care and took the money anyway. So, what's your opinion? What have you learned about the WikiLeaks and Podesta emails, more about the Clinton Foundation, that our listeners may have not spent time in learning about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the WikiLeaks emails, the one thing you have to say about WikiLeaks is to date, no one, and they've released, I believe, 10 million documents in total, roughly, not on this thing, but in total, and not a single one of them has ever been shown to be inauthentic. So I think we have to take these WikiLeaks releases seriously. I think the Clinton Foundation, neither the Clinton Foundation nor the Clinton campaign has effectively discredited any of this stuff. And to me, the things that really leaped out at me were, first of all, there was a memo dated, I think it was November 10th, 2008. And that was written by a lawyer, a relatively famous lawyer named Kumiki Gibson, who I believe was at one point either a partner or an attorney at Williams and Connolly, the fantastically powerful Washington D.C. headquartered law firm that has defended the Clinton family for so long. She was brought in, I believe, in September of 2008 to study the Clinton Foundation from the inside. Now, going back into history a little bit, September 2008 is just around the time, just after, I believe, the Democratic convention occurred. It was just after, Barack had been nominated and was the candidate. And so they're studying carefully, and she produces this memo after the election. I forget what day the election was in 2008, but I believe it was shortly after, on the 10th. Bruce Lindsay gets a memo, and this memo says, basically the Clinton Foundation is so many words, it doesn't say it like I'm going to say it, but it says it's a complete uncontrolled fraud. And, there's this problem, and that's like 17 pages or so of details. Yet, 6 days later, the Judicial Watch version of the supposed Memorandum of Understanding that was drafted to regulate behavior between the Clinton Foundation and the Barack Obama administration, it says the polar opposite, just 6 days later. So I look at that, and the conclusion I reach is that the Clintons were lying to the Obamas, that they lied to them through the process of her being vetted as Secretary of State, and then having lied and having allowed Barack Obama to put his important first moves, as Donald Trump is going through right now. I mean, you'd hate to think, if Mitt is going to be the Secretary of State, Mitt Romney, you'd hate to think that Mitt might be lying to you now in the vetting process, and you really hate to be Donald Trump and then putting your good name as president-elect, and you're spending political capital to get your candidate across the line confirmed. You really hate to think that the guy was lying to you the whole time. Well, the record sure seems to show that Barack Obama and his team could not possibly have known about this Kumiki Gibson memo, could not possibly have known about a later set of disclosures we find out from Doug Band in, I think, late November, early December November 2011. We find out from Maura Polly, who confirms this in February 2015. These are all WikiLeaks documents. We find out that actually in July of 2008, just as Hillary was finally making, or shortly after she made the decision to stop fighting Obama for the presidential Democratic presidential nomination, we find out that Ira Magaziner and the CEO of the HIV/AIDS entity, the entity that Bill and Hillary and Chelsea take such credit for, had diverted, that's what the memo says, diverted $23 million from their intended purposes, fighting HIV/AIDS. And then to cover it off, we find out that the Clinton Foundation board has said, all right, we'll just take money out of what they refer to as a quasi-endowment. Well, you're not allowed to do that. There's no evidence that there was a lawful endowment of any kind that big in 2008. So you're not allowed to do that as trustees. You're not allowed to, when you find a diversion, you're not supposed to keep the team involved who diverted the money, and you're certainly not supposed to divert money from another endowment you have that you haven't told people about. So, I mean, this thing was a mess in 2008. It was an utter disgrace and mess. And the thing that I find amazing about it is that, after Barack Obama got in there and Hillary got in there, we have yet to see any angry emails back and forth. And I think I've got to believe that somebody in the Obama team found out about the true state of affairs here. I mean, there are all these reports of how possibly political operatives, members of the Justice Department, and others were meeting fervently in the 2009-10 period. And there are allegations that, that people on the right were prosecuted aggressively by the IRS in just the same area, and for operating charities the wrong way. Where are the emails back and forth? Where are the communications back and forth? Where are the shocked emails from Valerie Jarrett or people around the president saying, "My goodness, what was going on here?" And why did they reorganize the Clinton Health Access Initiative? If you go to the MOU, that document I referred to earlier, it called for reorganizing the Clinton Global Initiative. There was no requirement to reorganize the health initiative. So why did they do that? And where are the emails back and forth, complaining about having to do it or explaining why you had to do it? And there's none of that yet. I think we now know why there was a need to operate a secret server. They were operating this rogue charity. They intended to fully continue doing it. Another set of things that's really shocking, the way charities are regulated in my state is that if you, when you first come into the state, and if there's a change afterwards, you got to explain where all your offices are. Well, it turns out they had a Harlem office that they were using for the charity. They had 2 offices midtown. Well, it turns out they had a secret office down in 77 Water Street. So they have a secret server, a secret office down in the Wall Street area. And that office, to make it very interesting, was in some way, I think either the subtenant or the prime tenant was Goldman Sachs. So they're leasing my office space from Goldman Sachs in a secret downtown office. Why do you need all these offices? I mean, you have a headquarters in Little Rock where it's cheap to operate with extra space. You got this big campus out there. Why do you have, all these offices in Manhattan? Why do you have an office in Boston? Why
Sounds like they're laundering money.
Well, yeah, it's highly suspicious stuff. And with all these things that are so suspicious, why did the George W. Bush administration allow this to go on?
The Bush family's friends with the Clintons. People don't know that. They see that the Bush family is on the Republican side, the Clintons are Democrats. They're actually very close friends. They actually teamed up in the Haiti, right? They created the co-charity, and didn't they split most of the money that was taken, and then the Haitians got the shaft. They got screwed.
Well, be careful there. I mean, yes, it is true that the Bush name has been lent to various joint charities. There was the Katrina one, there was the tsunami one before that, 2005, I think. Katrina in 2005, Gulf Coast in 2008, and then Haiti in 2010. But the Bush family and the Bush operatives were not all that. They were certainly not involved in the big fraud in Haiti, which is the Interim Haiti Recovery Commission. And that is something that Bill shepherded with the I think existing or previous Prime Minister of Haiti. That was the gigantic fraud in Haiti. That's the one that some people think got as much as maybe $13 billion, and that refuses to account for any of the money. The joint charity, which has its problems, is more like a $60, $70, $80 million affair, depending on how you look at it, in Haiti.
Okay, so, thanks for the clarification.
But it doesn't make it any less serious. See, when I started thinking about this a while back, I happen to know or am acquainted with some members of the Bush family, and when I was more friendly with them, I got a long lecture about how hurt H.W. was and how upset he was with the loss, and I spent quite a bit of time actually with this person, and so I was shocked to see H.W. work in tandem with Bill in the tsunami and then in the Katrina period. And I initially thought, that's great. They're putting aside politics. That's something to be admired. Until I looked more closely at it. And so, we've got now another former president, about to be former president, thinking he's going to do maybe one or maybe many more charities. When you travel in England, you'll see that there's these various stores, and they have these fancy, banners or whatever, signs on them that say, appointed by Her Majesty the Queen, XYZ. I think all charities that operate ought to have an official number, and there should be a central registry of these charities, and there should be a requirement that a charity list out in its disclosure form every single subsidiary or affiliate to which it is connected, and explain during the period of time of the year, when did it start, when did it end, so that you can really look and see and understand what a charity actually is. We don't have that requirement. You have it actually for publicly traded stocks. You have to in your 10K, I believe that you used to have to lay out all of your subsidiaries and affiliates, so somebody can check and say, oh, that really is part of GE, and you should have to do that for charities, because what's going on with this charity and with these presidential charities, there's shysters around the world who see this, and they'll set up a Barack Obama Foundation in Kenya. There may be no such thing, and they'll start raising money on the internet. It'll go to some account, and they'll just steal the money. I mean, we need to. And I know this. I think I may have related this story before to you, but about this time last year, closer to December, I noticed when I was just Googling idly, I noticed a solicitation in Gambia, in the country of Gambia in West Africa, which was a raffle that said, the winner will get a chance to jog on the beach with Bill Clinton on January 1st, 2016. And I thought to myself, what is Bill Clinton doing in Gambia on New Year's Eve? I mean, a lot of places I'd like. Gambia actually apparently has nice beach resorts and stuff, but nonetheless, why would you be, as the former president of the United States, in Gambia? And then the penny dropped, and I said, wait a minute, there's no Clinton Foundation in Gambia.
Yeah.
And so we got to stop this stuff. I mean, celebrity names are being used this way, president names are being used this way, and this is the kind of behavior you need to make an example of it and say, when you do this kind of stuff, you're punished.
Yeah, I hear the Clintons like the resort of the guy in Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. He's one of their largest donors, and then they also like Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, but that's for another show. We're just talking about their charity fraud. I mean, I think this family. There's been over 40 years of scandals going on with them. They managed to evade being charged or actually going to prison for a lot of them. Bill did lose his law license over the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Hillary Clinton said that, they were basically broke then. And then, that's why they started ramping up the Clinton Foundation and using it for donations and pay to play and paying for access. I guess now that she lost the election, hopefully she'll lose a lot of her power and her donations. But, so much damage has been done. We talked in past interviews about, how these foreign governments, whether it was Australia or Norway, they would donate money for so the poor Africans could get quality AIDS and HIV medicine. And then the Clintons were pocketing a lot of this money. They were going to corrupt drug manufacturers in India, and they were paying for medication oftentimes that didn't even work and pocketing the difference. So it's just deplorable, the stuff that the Clinton Foundation has done. Whether Hillary and Bill were actually aware of it or not, the other employees at the foundation, if they were doing it and stealing the money, they should go to prison as well. Unfortunately, I think the Department of Justice and FBI right now, what we have with Loretta Lynch and James Comey, and in the past with Eric Holder, you talked about how Obama said there's no scandals. Well, hello, look at Operation Fast and Furious with Eric Holder, which is a total disaster. The amount of scandals and corruption in those agencies, there are obviously agents, I think, that do want to do the right thing. I've heard from some of them, from some sources in the FBI, that they've looked at the amount of evidence of Hillary Clinton and on Weiner's computer. They think she's the Antichrist. And yet, we won't have people who are prosecuting. So hopefully the Trump administration will clean things up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think one area you touch on that really deserves a fuller discussion, and that is this whole area of fake medicine. I'm not a huge fan of government bureaucracies, but I labored under the misapprehension before I got involved in this project that, we had a pretty good system inside this country that would check to make sure that anything that's marketed as a medical product actually is a medical product and is tested. But when you think about it, the ability to package a counterfeit medicine, the ability to pass a batch test, but have vast amounts of the medicine have no active pharmaceutical ingredient. These are serious matters. I mean, instead of we've got an aging population that's going to demand more and more medicine, it would seem to me that instead of coming up with fanciful projects, that we ought to go back to base principles and say, we've got a federal government, it's supposed to look after us. What are the things that the federal government should be able to do well? And one of them, I would argue, is to make sure that any medicine that comes inside this country is indeed real. And what I see here is a disaster. I mean, just in this one case. I mean, the ways in which the people who have been running this mess, this unregulated, unaudited, uncontrolled mess, may have allowed adulterated, even harmful medicine to end up on black markets and in countries around the world where there's no real infrastructure. That's disgusting. And a real example needs to be made of whoever was doing that. And we need to go back and say, all right, Mr. Magaziner, you've taken credit for this since July 2002. You were one of the architects of this thing. What have you been doing with your time? What steps have you been taking to make sure to control this mess, or have you just been content to operate in chaos? And who's on your team? And why? What were these accountants doing? And where are the letters from accountants? What did they check to give you an audit? And what do the lawyers do? Right. And we really need to get into that a bit, because it's one thing to give these pious speeches about how you're so noble and and how you're going to help everybody, but then you get into power and you operate this mess for this long and then use it. I mean, Hillary Clinton, when she was under fire in the campaign, would always trot out the work of her family fighting HIV/AIDS around the world as a reason why you should back off, because we really do important work. James Carville was quoted as saying, recently, I think, that if they shut the Clinton Foundation down, a lot of people are going to die. I'd make the reverse point. Because the Clinton Foundation has operated in the way it's been operating, a lot of people have died. And that's just, you're not supposed to do that. I mean, the Hippocratic Oath, I think, that it was sort of the centerpiece of the medical trade here, was one of the, I believe the first rule is, first, do no harm.
Yeah, Charles, it sounds like the accounting agency that was in charge of the Clinton Foundation, it sounds like they were doing Arthur Andersen Enron level accounting fraud, that they either were in cahoots with them and complicit at the very beginning, or they found out about the fraud and then, instead of forcing them to come forward and tell the truth about it, they helped cover it up then.
It certainly looks that way to me. I mean, there's the accounting firm you're talking about. The original one is BKD, B as in boy, King, K as in king, D as in dog. That firm stopped, I believe, doing the normal auditing work starting in 2013, and it was replaced by, for the main foundation, Price Waterhouse. And Price Waterhouse has now produced fraudulent audits, in my view, for 2013, 14, and 15, and I've warned them. I started warning them in 2015. Please don't do this. Now I'm in no mercy. I mean, this is reprehensible behavior. They know better. They must know better. And if they don't know better, I mean, either way, either they didn't know about this, in which case there's a set of issues that they have, or they did know about it and they tried to cover it up. They have deep pockets. They're around the world, and you're right to compare them with Arthur Andersen.
Well, Charles, I really appreciate you pursuing the truth, and many others do too. You're a very brave man, to go up against the Clintons. There's a lot of nefarious deeds that the Clintons have done, starting many, many decades ago, over 30 years ago. There's a lot of scandals, a lot of people who have had mysterious deaths. There was 2 people, I'm not sure you've seen, there's 2 people recently involved in the stuff that's come out on WikiLeaks with Pizzagate, hashtag on Twitter, or hashtag Little Lives Matter. 2 of the researchers have already wound up dead. So unfortunately, it's very sad. My last question for you, though, has to do with the mainstream media. Donald Trump has said the mainstream media didn't cover him very fairly during this election. They were one-sided. This is the most I've ever seen the mainstream media go after any one candidate in an election. But is the mainstream media going out of their way to not cover the Clinton Foundation and the evidence you bring up? Because I see articles once in a while. I saw one last year from the Daily Caller about the Clinton Foundation, how Hillary could potentially be indicted for 8 different felony charges. I occasionally see your articles on Breitbart, but I don't see a lot of other coverage about problems with the Clinton Foundation from the mainstream media.
Well, thank you for bringing up the Daily Caller. There's an excellent investigative team there. Mark Tapscott is the head of it, and Richard Pollack has been doing a lot of work along with Chuck Ross. And actually, Clarence Thomas's wife that does videography for them and did a nice interview with me. So that's a fine organization. There are quite a few different investigative reporters at different places who have done many great articles. Sarah Westwood, Alana Goodman, Jeff Girth he hasn't written anything, but he's been burrowing in. And then there are multiple people around the world who are very interested. Of course, the people at Fox have dug in. John Batchelor over on WABC Radio, and I'm sure I'm leaving other people out. But there are quite a few people who have actually gotten into this. And what I would say is, the mainstream media has lost its touch with reality. They talk about fake news, Google and whatever. The fake news is frankly coming out of the New York Times, let's accept the Wall Street Journal, but the Boston Globe, the elite media, CNN is a joke. I sat down with Jake Tapper in late May, laid this all out. Was supposed to have an interview go up, nothing. I've been keeping them, fully informed. Nothing. The Fox people have picked up on it.
Oh, you mean the Clinton News Network wouldn't post your interview?
Well, but the thing is, Jake Tapper, when he decides to go after somebody, he goes after people. And, that's what the Fourth Estate is supposed to keep people honest in both parties.
He was outed, though, in the WikiLeaks, though, he was outed as meeting with the Clintons prior to trying to help Hillary's campaign. So, I mean, he's not going to be, maybe he's more objective and more of an investigative journalist on other issues, but this seems a one that he won't touch. It's just really unbelievable. She seems like the chosen one. From what we learned, how more than 65 journalists from the Daily Beast and Vox and so many other mainstream media channels and websites met with Hillary Clinton for tips on how to improve her image. So I mean, obviously for regular objective news people, if they do have a meeting like that, they should disclose it. They shouldn't have a meeting like that in the first place, and yet they're doing it and giving her favorable coverage.
Well, what I would say is that, Jason, it's giving you and Mo, with your Wall Street for Main Street thing, which is getting, I think, more and more traction, it's creating an opportunity for you. I mean, I think now, even my own father, who's 90 and was a very loyal New York Times guy, he doesn't really catch news from traditional outlets anymore. He's a scientist, so he's very adept with, actually an expert on software. So he gets his news from non-traditional sources, and I think that's what's really happening. And these people in the mainstream media who thought they had it locked and were concerned what might happen should Hillary win if they asked them tough questions, are now going to see themselves, that they're in the wilderness right now. I mean, who would take these people seriously? I watched the election coverage, and I was disgusting to watch the election coverage. I mean, they were so sure of themselves across the board, and they were so wrong. And, the mainstream media needs to take a good look at itself and ask, how do we do far better? How do we learn from these mistakes? Because this isn't the only election where the masses are going to shake off the yoke of the experts, who are all mostly conflicted. We have a system that is in structural realignment around the world. Big governments are failing most countries, and the big governments, the multilateral governments, they're all going to be shaken up. And those who are enthralled to these big established people are going to be all discredited. I mean, I used to like, for example, The Economist magazine. I won't touch that rag. It's been completely wrong.
Yeah, The Economist now, Charles, to add to your points there, is just an apologist now for the central bankers, that the central bankers screw the academic PhD economists, make huge mistakes, screw things up, and then, we got to keep doubling down the policies. We didn't do enough of this. That's why things aren't working. Or, it's the private sector's fault. That's why things aren't working. It's just unbelievable. And then, they apologize for the governments because the governments are involved in this too and letting, the central bankers get away with it. We have huge problems with corruption in governments and also, central bankers having way too much power. And, magazines like The Economist don't help matter because it seems to me, in my opinion, I think they're apologists for this status quo elites.
I agree. And the good thing we're seeing here, though, is that the public is waking up. I think in this country in particular, you get away from the rabid dogs, who are the worst elements on, let's say, either side of the divide. the people in America, and I spent a lot of time in 2016 on progressive stations, not natural homes for me, and I've been treated wonderfully by Progressive Radio Network, in particular by Utrice Lead. I've been on WBAI with Randy Credico. It's been very nice, very thoughtful, and I've now spent time with many of these people who are as disturbed. They look at this, they look at the Democratic Party, and they see the Clinton wing as having destroyed and really destroyed the appeal of the Democratic Party. So
yep.
I think we need to forget about party labels. We need to get back to deciding problems that can be solved and actually fixing them, and holding Donald Trump and holding the Republican majorities in Congress responsible for, you wanted the mantle, you've got it, pick some problems that we can get behind and fix, and let's all fix them. And then let's go to the next problem, and the next problem. And stop this perpetual divide that seems to serve nobody other than the politically connected lobbyists who feast off the mess.
Amen, Charles. I completely agree. And you don't have to be a libertarian or a Republican to not like Hillary Clinton or hate Hillary Clinton. After what we learned from the WikiLeaks and how the DNC basically was rigged with the primaries against Bernie, with the questions and so many other tactics the mainstream media used, I think this has caused the Project Veritas videos from James O'Keefe, who did excellent investigative journalism work that the mainstream media should have been doing. When you add all these things up from WikiLeaks, whether it was the DNC leaks or the Podesta emails and Project Veritas videos, these hurt the Democrats a lot more in this election than they did the Republicans. Although, if the Republicans slip up and they have emails, WikiLeaks is coming for you too. Okay.
Again, let's just let's keep our focus. We're in a game here. The country's got some serious problems. Let's work together. Let's fix them, and let's have some fun.
Yeah, I would prefer more transparency in government, but it seems that the governments want more transparency among their citizens with spying and things like that, with Edward Snowden revelations. So hopefully we get more transparency within our government, and I would prefer, smaller government, less taxes, less regulation. I think that's when the United States flourished and small business was able to grow and create jobs. Hopefully Donald Trump will be able to fix some of that. Small business owners with Obamacare and so many other taxes and rules and regulations, they just were not confident about, hiring full-time employees. And, we need to fix the economy so entrepreneurs and small business or small, medium-sized and large companies are confident about investing back in the United States, building, factories and spending money on research and development to create new products and services, like you said.
Great.
Well, Charles, you do an excellent job. You're such a brave man. If our listeners want to keep updated on your research into the Clinton Foundation and anything else you have going on, how did they do so?
Well, the best way is just my website, www.charlesortel.com. I haven't been updating it recently because I've been so busy in so many different interviews and things. I'm also on Twitter at Charles Ortel, and I try actually to tweet quite a bit every day. We're going to be, it's the holiday season now, and I think we're going to have a relatively quiet end of the year, but look for a lot of activity next year. There's a lot of stuff coming.
Yeah, and I hope, those what's coming is the charges. I hope, the stuff that's come out today is just a head fake or a ruse. They're playing poker, that the Trump administration is playing poker, that they don't want people knowing exactly what they have planned for the Clintons. Because I think, some of the people he appointed on his administration are pretty anti-Clinton, and they've said in the past that they would prosecute her. So hopefully we do see that, no one should be above the law, like how the Clintons have been in the past. That's what made the United States special for a long time, is that people weren't above the law. We weren't this, third world banana republic where if you had the right political connections or money, you could just buy your way off a charge or murder or felonies or all these things.
Well, I'd say a simple thing we should look for is the Clinton Foundation should not be allowed to raise another penny until they correct their existing public filings. And that's gratuitous advice, because I can tell you the laws are very strict, and every day that they continue to do this is a day they are buying a lot more legal jeopardy. So let's just put it simply. It is in the interest of the potential defendants here to cease fundraising forthwith. that's something they better do.
Okay, and if our listeners out there, if they see the Clinton Foundation still raising money, report it. Report it to your congressman. Report it to the IRS and all the proper authorities. And you know, if we can do it, maybe we have to be citizen investigative journalists and auditors because the people in power, the government bureaucrats, are not doing all their job, or they're claiming they don't have enough resources. So if enough people do it and report it, maybe something will actually be done about it.
Hear, hear.